Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to talk for about half an hour for an introduction to the model. As already mentioned, if there are any questions of clarification, feel free to interrupt or put it in the text box at the side of the screen. We will have 10 minutes for questions, certainly once the presentation's finished. And then as we get towards the end of the seminar, I will just quickly take you through downloading the software, for those of you that haven't done so already, just so everybody has it available to work with. Should add the session is being recorded, which is mainly to record what I'm saying, but obviously if anybody else comes in, just so you know, that will be recorded as well. Okay, now I'm aware on the lines we have some people who have used the model a bit previously, some who know a bit about it, and others who it's entirely new to. So I am going to start from the beginning. So some of you may have seen bits of it before, but we can get everybody to at least have a basic idea, then it's a good starting position. So the model was designed, as Hirabi said, starting from the middle of last year, 2016. And it was designed to meet a purpose to assess energy policy, although it could also be used to look at some other economic policies as well. The first slide shows the main dimensions of the model. It was clear from the beginning that energy economy linkages were sort of the reason for doing this exercise, but it also had to be at state level. At the bottom we say annual projections out to 2035, which is sort of seen as being a long-term perspective of the decisions that are being made right now. So it's every year out to 2035, and we'll see that in the model results. Now the other points on the slide, as we talk about the structure of the model, as with other economic models, there is an accounting framework at the center of it for calculating variables like GDP. But embedded into that, we have a set of econometric equations with behavioral elements like price elasticities, which, and putting those two things together sort of gives a model of the whole economy, split by sector and by state, and that's what we've been aiming for. Sharabi already talked quite a bit about the background to it, but I think just to emphasize on this slide, clearly when we build the model there are constraints with available data, etc., but we have as much as possible tried to set it up to meet the requirements of the policy people, so which means having the disaggregation by sector, but also by state. And while the model is certainly available to use as a research tool as well, the sorts of questions we expect it to answer are sort of high-level policy questions, and along with other tools as well. Now, I think one thing we've always been emphasizing throughout the model design and now implementation is how it's a collaborative effort and joint between us based here in Cambridge. You can see a picture of Cambridge at the top. I can assure you the weather is not like that today, and it isn't very often. We in Cambridge set up the initial structure of the model and built the data and the code and put it all together. But we we don't know so much about the relevant policy questions in India and in the States, and I don't think we're ever going to either. So we're really at the stage now where the arrows on the left, where it's primarily been just one arrow so far as we've been building the model, but now it becomes a much more two-way process. And while we in Cambridge will continue to provide support to users of the model, really we're at the point now where we hand it over to researchers who are based in India, and they can design their own scenarios, their own policies, and look at the things they want to look at, and sort of our role becomes one that's in the background almost. Now, the last point on the bottom right, I think, is really important, because this has been a question that's been raised at previous workshops. The model we've always had this in mind, that it's designed to complement the existing tools that are there. Because I know there are many people using CGE modeling and input-output analysis, for example. We're in no way trying to replace that, but what we're trying to do instead is to provide an additional tool that has some advantages and some disadvantages to these other approaches, but just gives an alternative option that can be used to look at policy. And ideally, we could get a group of people who are interested in using it, who could then work together, cooperate, provide mutual support, and then the thing could start to really take off and have a life of its own. But that's quite ambitious, I think, but it would be amazing if it could happen. The one slide on the key features is quite a lot of information being put together on a single slide, so I'll go through it reasonably quickly. These are the sort of 6 guiding principles in the boxes that we were sort of working with from the beginning of the process. It's quite similar to what we say about our own global model, on which E3 India was based. The first box I've already talked a bit about, just the dimensions and the disaggregation in the model. So having the states and territories, but also the sectoral disaggregation as well. Particularly for energy and climate policy, where different sectors have different options for, say, fuel switching or efficiency improvements. We've always said that the sectoral disaggregation is important. Now, having seen the data for India state by state, we can see there are very big differences between the states as well. So this is an additional dimension that we think is quite important. Okay, comprehensive just means we cover the whole economy. Although there is a sectoral disaggregation, if you add all the sectors together, you get to the total. So variables like GDP can come out of the model. Similarly for the energy system, again, there's a set of sectors defined, but you get to total energy consumption if you add them together. Moving across the top to the empirical nature of the model, that sort of comes to the econometric specification. A really big part of the model building exercise was gathering all the data at state level by sector. We have used that to inform the model parameters through econometric estimation. Now, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages of that. While it's great to be sort of relying on the data that's out there to estimate the relationships, of course, if there are issues with the data, then it weakens the power of those equations. But it's very much at the center of the approach that we use. Now, the box for consistent is talking about the accounting system in the model. Social accounting matrix with an input-output table at the core. The accounting system is basically fully consistent with the international system of national accounts. So that just sort of holds together all the different parts of the model. Forward-looking, I think that's reasonably obvious. The model is being used to assess what happens if new policies are introduced either now or in a few years' time. As I already said, it goes forward to 2035 year by year, so ex-ante analysis. I will show quickly some ex-post analysis that we also did, but the focus is very much to be on testing policies and looking forwards. And then the last box about the modules. There are separate modules for the energy system, for the environment, by which we mean greenhouse gas emissions mainly, and of course the economy. There is a separate bottom-up engineering type model for the power generation sector, as it's so important, which I probably won't have too much time to talk about today, but in the follow-up seminars we will be talking about. And then the last point about decentralization is the model can be linked to, say, other tools, for example, transport models, to do a sort of integrated analysis. And in terms of flexibility, we try to leave that option open. Okay, I'll move the slide on. Again, some of the, just carrying on the theme of the key features of the model. Some of this I'm sure will be familiar to the people on the call who have done modeling themselves. The first 2 points talk about, again, about the accounting and the basic structure. I think that is pretty consistent with a CGE approach in there. The dynamic point, well, dynamic means different things to different people. I'm well aware of that. When we talk about the modeling being dynamic, we mean that the changes year to year are important. So in the econometric equations, there are lagged effects, there are persistent effects, and there are movements towards a sort of steady state equilibrium type outcome. But one of the key things that comes out of the model is not just the endpoints, but the path for how you get there. And then the last point on the slide, the time series data, again referring to the econometrics. And as it says at the bottom, the equations are all estimated by sector and by region. By region, we mean state and territory. So each equation is specific to the particular sector involved. Okay, first point on this slide is getting a bit more technical. It's comparing the modeling approach in E3 India to a CGE, computable general equilibrium approach. Some of the most obvious differences there are given in the slide. Essentially, what the main difference is that in E3 India, prices don't automatically move towards an equilibrium position, but instead there are econometric equations about the prices, which effectively means the model is much more demand driven and comes from a more Keynesian type economic background. We're going to go into that in quite a lot more detail, I think, in the follow-up seminars, but I think at this point, just to be aware that there are some differences there. Scenarios, yeah, in case it wasn't obvious already, the way the model is run, we have a baseline case, which is business as usual, and then policies are entered in a scenario-based approach, and then we compare the results of the scenario to the baseline to see the policy impacts. And then uncertainty appears all over the model, and we don't have any assumptions about perfect knowledge or perfect foresight. So in that sense, but also we encourage through the model itself as much use of sensitivity analysis as possible to test the robustness of results, because we think we're all well aware that models have their own assumptions. They are approximations of reality, and the more that can be tested for robustness, the better. Okay, one of the key graphics describing the model, which I've showed many times before. Going back to the modular approach, these are the different modules that are there: economy, emissions, and energy, moving around. The key thing about this slide is the arrows going between the different boxes, because that's how the model sort of holds the different parts together. For example, across the bottom, we have the links between the economy and the energy system. The blue arrow is basically saying energy demand is a function of what is going on in the economy, so faster economic growth, more energy demand. But then going the other way, we also have the feedback from the energy system, because some of the economic sectors are energy suppliers, so the more energy you consume, the better those sectors are doing. This is all held together in the modeling framework, and we managed to link together the physical data for energy, which is units as tons of oil equivalent, linking that to the economic data through the input-output tables and the other monetary values that are used. In that sense, it's a bit like a systems dynamics approach, for those of you that are familiar with that. I should say quickly, technology sits in the middle. It's quite important. We do have an endogenous technology representation, so policies to boost research in new technologies is one of the options that are there. And as the arrows show, that feeds into all the different parts of the model, and it's quite important. But again, I think this is probably a topic for the follow-up seminar. Okay, the economic accounting system, I would guess for some of you this is probably very familiar already, but for others there may be some new bits to it. This slide is showing the demand-driven economic approach to the model. And we start in the top left with the input-output table, which is all the sectors buying things from each other, the intermediate demands. And then as we move across the top, this is where the econometric equations come in. So for household consumption, well, government has actually assumed government expenditure, but investment, and then exports and imports, trade, which remember is trade at state level, so it's the movement of goods between the states. Those are the components of demand. Sum those together, you get to total demand. And then the basic assumption, which is the big arrow coming down to the bottom left, is that companies will supply the goods to meet this demand as long as they don't have any constraints that prevent them from doing so, like supply maximum capacities. And then assuming that the companies make that supply, you get value added and of course the employment that goes with the production and the taxes that go with it. And you go round the loop back up to the top, and you see you go round, you can iterate around this several times. And that's sort of how you get the multiplier type effects from the model. And some people do think of it as being a big multiplier type system with extra bits added on. Okay, more interesting to the policy people, the sorts of inputs that we can put in. And these are, in general, going to be policy inputs. The most basic stuff, I think, is probably carbon tax or energy tax. Some people do that just to sort of test the model and compare it to other models that are out there. Now, incentives for renewables is certainly also possible. That could include feed-in tariffs. It could include subsidies for certain technologies. It could include the public procurement as well, so just public investment in some of the more developing power sector technologies that are out there, and helping them to get established in the market. Energy efficiency is certainly also an option. We need some additional model inputs for that to do with how much it all costs and what the potential energy savings are. But as long as we have that information, and there are sources like the IEA, for example, that can provide it, then this is quite an important area of policy analysis as well. The next bullet talks about international shocks. Yeah, if there's a big change in oil prices, what does it mean for production in India and the States? Certainly, that's possible. It doesn't need to be price shocks. It could also be due to, say, faster economic growth in India's trading partners. But all of these things can be put in fairly easily. It's not too difficult. And then the last point, talking about economic policies more generally, we have always had in mind that the model would be used for energy and climate policy, but as the last slide showed, there is a full economic representation in there as well. So fiscal policy, labour market policy, there are other options there, moving away from the energy policy area as well. So if those were the inputs, let's talk quickly about the outputs. And 2 slides on this. First of all, the main economic outputs. I think many people, and I'm sure most of the people on this call, are well aware of the limitations of GDP as an economic indicator. It is still either the first or the second number that the policy people look for when they want to know the impacts of a policy. So, of course, it's one of the main outputs from the model. We can break down GDP to sector and state, going to gross value added, and also output, so total production levels. And then breaking GDP into its main component parts. But that all comes out automatically as well, consumption, investment, and trade, and then also the impact on prices and inflation as well. Now, I said GDP was either the first or the second indicator that people look at. Well, the other one is employment. Employment and unemployment are both outputs from the model, which have get a lot of attention as well. They're not the only labour market indicators. Wage rates and labour supply also in there as well. And of course, employment is also broken down by sector for the 20 sectors in the model, which can give a sort of indication about skills requirements as well, although that goes a bit beyond what the model itself can do. It is something that some people ask questions about. Okay, the energy and environment indicators are reasonably straightforward. Consumption of energy by when we say fuel user, that's the sectors, and then the fuel type is either solid, liquid, or gas. Energy prices, which are to some extent set by the international markets, but where there are differences within India, they will come out from the model as well. And then from that, using basic IPCC type emissions coefficients, CO2 emissions, which are linking the emissions to fuel consumption. Okay, now 2 slides on the software, starting with the ugly one. This is what the model looks like when it's solving. It is well, when people say the model is a black box, this isn't all what they mean, but it is a black box when it's solving. It's from the command prompt in Windows, operating on a standard PC or laptop. It doesn't, I mean, there are not really any minimum system requirements to run the model. The faster the computer, the faster the model runs, but even on an old PC, it runs fairly easily, just a bit slowly. So that's what we see when we're running it. The interface does make it all a lot more user-friendly and palatable to work with. This is just a quick screen grab from it. I will show actually using the interface towards the end of this session. But here's one example from it, which is looking at a baseline and a scenario case for total energy consumption by the power sector in Andhra Pradesh, showing how it increases. Power sector fuel use increases over time, but in this scenario, it increases by a bit less. And there's lots of options for different ways of looking at the results and also to export the data to other things. So what I'm trying to say from this slide is when you run the model, it will look a lot nicer than what was on the previous slide. Okay, now getting towards the end of the presentation, I wanted to put up two slides on a question that we've been asked a lot, which is what sort of validation has the model been through? And it's a very good and relevant question, because if the model is going to do policy analysis, we need to make sure that it has been properly validated. Now, there's lots of different ways the model has been validated. Of course, when the data had been gathered, then that's had its own checking and validation procedures. There is a section in the model manual, and that is available on the web page. But I wanted to show up just two specific parts of the validation. And this slide is talking about the econometric estimation. Now, of course, from the econometrics, we have lots of standard tests that come out, like T distributions, tests for endogeneity, and likewise. But two particular things we look at are basically the parameters that come out of the estimation. And the slide is showing an example for the employment equation. Now, the main factors behind employment are output and wages, and we'd expect if economic production output increases, then employment would go up. If wages increase, then employment would go down. The chart is showing what is essentially a ranking of all the estimated parameters across all the sectors and all the states for the long run part of the equation. And it's a ranking showing the coefficient going from a minimum value of 0 up to 1.5 or 2. And the one for wages has been flipped just to put it alongside the output one. It should be negative. Now, if the econometric equations were rubbish, we would expect to see lots of values of 0 because no significant relationships are found. Maybe some very large values because there's unstable relationships, or just the data are not fitting very well and we've got insignificant parameters that have got through. Ideally, what we would like to see is a sort of straight line going up, just showing a broad range of parameter values reflecting the differences between the sectors, or possibly something like an accumulated normal distribution. What we have seen in our equation results is that, okay, out of the 500 odd equations that have been estimated, and that's taking out some of the sectors that just don't have any employment. So some of the, say the coal extraction sector, it doesn't exist in all the states, so there's no equation estimated. That's why we don't have a full 640. But we can see that, okay, for the wage term, 50 equations didn't have a significant relationship. For output, 100. That's not too surprising because we know there are some sectors, like the energy extraction sectors, that don't behave in what we would call a normal economic way. Employment is entirely determined by what's going on in energy markets rather than the usual economic relationships. So there are some that are zero, but beyond that we see quite a nice gradual increase with many of the parameters between 0 and 1, which is sort of what we would expect from this kind of equation. Towards the end, we can see some sort of quite large increases in the parameter values, which is showing there are a few unstable equations in there. And of course, we've looked in to see exactly which sectors and which stage they are, and often just replace those equations. So we were quite happy to see this coming out from the estimation, which was a good sign. And then the other validation that's described in the manual is the system as a whole, which is what we get when we put together all the equations and all the accounting relationships in the model and just run it and see what happens. And this is a question put to us in some of the previous seminars, is have you tested the model running over the historical period to see how well it matches the data? Well, this chart is basically showing an example of doing that. So we have the years on the bottom. You can see on 1993 to up to 2006. The chart is showing GDP, and the orange bars should be the actual data as for India as a whole, and the blue line is showing what the model said it would be based on the equations. So any errors in those equations should be reflected in this line. So it's not perfect. I don't think anyone expected it to be perfect, but it is quite close. And this is on a scale that's been expanded a bit as well. So the y-axis crosses at, I think, 20 million rather than 0. So it is exaggerating the differences a bit. But we're actually very pleased to see just how well the model was tracking the actual data, which is showing that the econometric equations, not just on their own, are working quite well, but as they get fitted together in the system as a whole, it is doing quite a good job of tracking the reality. Okay, getting towards the end of my time. So last slide to summarize. Key points to take from this presentation. The characteristics of the model. It's a new tool defined at state level. As far as we're aware, it's still the only model that's doing that, including every state together and the linkages between the states. Everything's broken down to sectors as well. That's the other main dimension. And then the last 2 points, the model relate to the econometrics. The model is empirical. That has some advantages and some disadvantages as well relating to the data. And finally, it's not a computable general equilibrium model. It's not designed to replace any CGE models that are out there. It's something that is meant to be complementary to those existing tools. And again, it has some advantages and some disadvantages over that. But it's a tool that's available for all of you guys to download and use in the way that you best seem fit for the policies that are of most interest to you. And that's it. Thank you very much. Surabi, are you going to take over?
Hi. Are we open for questions, or you would be going through the model?
Yeah, I think if we can do the questions now. So any questions on the slides, and then
Okay.
we'll go for about 10 minutes of that, and then I will do a quick demonstration for how to. We'll just quickly show how to get the model and download it, so that everybody has it available.
Sure.
And then any questions relating to that will be part of the next seminar.
Hello.
Fine. So, yeah.
Yeah, Surabhi, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to know, this input-output table. Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, what is the role of the input-output table in this econometric exercise? The input-output table gives us the gross output. Is that all, or is there any feedback from the econometric to the input-output, and from input-output again back to econometric estimation? Is there a loop, or is it just econometric estimation of final demand and input-output table giving the gross output?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For the main parts, it is, as you said, the intermediate demands determined through the input-output table, and the final demands are determined by the econometric equations. The main exception to that is the energy sectors, where we have econometric equations for energy demand, and the input-output coefficients are adjusted to reflect the changes there.
Acha. Thank you. Acha.
Yeah, Dr. Van, please continue.
Yeah. Can I ask any questions about the econometric equations? I've been through the econometric equations, or should I ask them on the next day? Can I ask questions on the econometric equations? Or
yeah, well, yeah, go ahead. If it's getting too technical, we can push it back to the next one. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this system is estimating each of the econometric equations for each of the 32 states. Is it each equation? Your manual, I have this manual in front of me. There are 16 sets of equations. 16 sets of equations, and each equation is estimated at the level of 32 regions, or
yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay. And then from these we go to the input-output, and we get the aggregate gross output. And from this econometric module, we also calculate prices. Those prices feed onto the energy module, and the energy system that gives us some estimates of, or am I going wrong? Energy system gives us some estimates of energy demand. Is that how the model is working?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what about investment? Are we estimating investment for all the 20 sectors in the input-output table, or is it for only certain selected sectors? Industrial investment is for all the 20 sectors?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can see there's a question about the 20 sectors in the textbooks as well.
Yeah.
The reason for having the 20 sectors, it basically reflects the available data, and we were guided by that. But we did expand the energy sectors a bit, just to give better feedbacks between the energy system and the economic part of the model. But yeah, otherwise, the choice of 20 sectors was for practical reasons. Yeah. Now for investment, that's one of the biggest gaps in the data, where it's most difficult to find the information. So we have tried to estimate investment for each sector, but some of the equations run into problems because the gaps in the data make it quite difficult to do any estimation. But it's the structure is set up that way, and well, we hope over time the data will improve as well.
Thank you. You have a FTT power submodel, that is future technology transformations for power sector. When we do energy comparative statics of different energy policies, actually how do we do it? We make some exogenous changes in the power sector model, and that leads to the results. Is that how we do targeting renewable energy? So we change the parameters in the FTT model, and then that gives us the results. Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's two ways of doing it. The first way is we can set exogenously the power sector mix. So we just say we don't know why it happens, but this is the energy system that you end up with. And then the second option is to put policies into the FTT submodel, which could relate to, say, feed-in tariffs or subsidies, or carbon taxes as well. And then the submodel will determine the energy system that comes out of it. And of course, the economic linkages will all follow from that.
Just one clarification. Supposing you put in a few subsidies or tariffs in this FTT model, and does the user get to know what is the quantitative effect of these tariffs? I mean, by that, how much is the energy production of certain types going up? Do we get to know it as we use the model? Can we see it from the model, because the model appears to be transparent? So hello. Hello.
Yeah, to answer the question, yeah, very much so. This would be one of the key outputs of the model for that type of scenario. So there would be variables for capacity and generation, and then of course the fuel consumption that follows from that.
Oh, Hector, just sorry, I'm coming with a lot of questions. Just last question from my part. I have read the manual, and it says that this difference, the last slide that you, not the last one, towards the end, one of the slides that you showed, there is a gap between the endogenous variables that the model gives and the official forecast. But this gap, you call it the error. It is not econometric error. That is what is given in the manual. The manual says that this error is different from econometric error. Can you tell me in brief, why does this error occur? Is it because of different data sources? Is it because official projections have come from different data sources? Why does this error come?
Yeah, it comes ultimately from the econometric errors. It's sort of the accumulation of all these errors, and of course some of them will go against each other as well.
Oh, yeah.
But this is putting the whole lot into the system and seeing what happens when it comes out. So yeah, ultimately it comes back to the econometrics.
Because I'm reading your manual right now, so it says these errors are referred to as residuals, although the meaning is slightly different from the definition used in econometric estimation. And you have used Akaike information criteria or other criteria, and you say you've got good fit. In that case, why does this error, there's a persistent error. The error is not magnifying, that's fine, but there is a persistent gap between the endogenous variables and what is shown by historical data. So how can we, are there methods of reducing this gap?
Yes, I think we know there are some equations that really don't fit the data very well.
Okay.
And we work to either improve those equations, or if there's nothing that can be done, we actually don't use those equations. We use a simpler methodology, like one-to-one relationship with another indicator or something like that. So there has been a bit of that in the validation calls, and when we model things going forwards, there's that going on as well. Sometimes it's a judgment call. For some sectors, we just know that the econometric equations aren't going to work, especially ones related to commodities and with prices going up and down. So it's a combination of art and science, I would say. It's once we get really deep into to the model construction, we just do our best to get it close without losing too much of the econometric information.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hector, we have a question from Dr. Pradeep about imports and exports.
Yeah, it's a very good question as well. It's on the point of one of the most difficult parts of the modelling. So, trade in general is I think an issue, and because we don't have very much data about the trade between the states. We have done our best to estimate some flows of goods between the states, which I'm quite happy for people to come back and say that this could be improved upon, because it's not really our area of expertise at all. The trade of energy goods is particularly difficult because it's not really responsive to price, so the standard econometric equations don't work so well. I think for the specific question on the text about trade with neighboring countries of energy goods, that probably has to be done by assumption. I don't think we're going to get a very good relationship there.
Can the E-3 national model help us deal with this issue? Like,
yeah,
it's a different modeling framework, but like,
so E-3, our global model, has India as a country alongside other countries, so it has more scope for doing bilateral relationships between the countries. But for energy, still, it's very, very difficult. Even there, I would probably still do it by assumption.
Any more questions?
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the questions. We have only a few minutes left, so if we can use that time just to go to the practicalities of downloading the model, and just so everyone getting started, just so everyone is at a good starting point. I think that would be really good, and then we'd be well set up for the next seminar to follow. You wanted it? Okay, so I'll just go to a separate presentation on that. No, I'm sure many of you have done this already. Okay, the web page, which you should all have seen to register for this seminar. The model can also be downloaded from there if anyone has missed it. It's the bit that's highlighted in yellow on the slide. If you click on that link, you'll be taken to a form. You have to provide just name and email address, an institution. Don't worry, we're not going to circulate this to anybody. It's just to have a record so that when there are updates to the model, we can let you all know that there is a new version available that can be downloaded again the same way. So just those three things, press submit, and you'll get a message saying thank you. Now you should then receive an email that gives you the link to actually downloading the software. And all things going well, this is thanks to the power of Google. Follow the link, you'll be taken to this page here, and I think just press on the button to press the bit in the top right to download it. Sorry, my GoToMeeting panel is in front of the the slide. Press the bit in the top right to see that, and you can download it to your desktop. One more stage after that, it will come as a zip file just to make the downloading faster, but extract that in the usual way, right click and extract, and then you can get it onto your PC, and it can go onto a C drive or external hard drive. Doesn't really matter, whatever your preferred setup is. Okay, now just to get started, you'll see when the software is downloaded, the folder that has the model software in it, then 2 Word documents that are there just to help you get started, the basic user guide, which I think is in the model manual as well, and then the document about test scenarios to give some examples about getting the model up and running. Goes to launch the model, double click on the manager.exe shortcut, and then everything will open. Okay, now if you open it, and if you can, we say if you can use Google Chrome, because it seems to work best in Google Chrome. I'm not saying it won't work at all in other web browsers, but Google Chrome seems to provide the least problems. This is what you'll see when you open it. Various tabs across the top that relate to the different model inputs, and then running the model and the model results. Well, this is what the next seminar is going to be about, but just very quickly, running the model brings together all the inputs that are in the previous tabs. So you put them all in, and then there'll be a button to run, which is the green one, and it will go. And then the model results, which refresh. Okay, model results show any runs that have been done already. Just select it here. This is a base run example I've done. Press enable front end, and you will get up the full options to look at results. And key one is to select your scenario, select a variable. Say we take GDP. And select a state, and then the charts will start to appear. And there's lots of options to explore there. Any problems with installation, of course, please get in touch with Surabi and with us, and we can help out with that. Okay, in the last couple of minutes that we have, are there any questions on that, sort of urgent questions preventing the software from opening or downloading or anything like that? I'll interpret silence as it working perfectly for everybody, not that you haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I see the registration list. I think many of the participants have not downloaded the new model. We have provided a new version on 30th of August. So I would request all of you to download it before the second session on econometric equation and hands-on with this model, because it will come very handy for you, and you can just start getting acquainted with various variables, and it's pretty easy to do that. So.
Hello, I've already downloaded the software for the model. I'm not very comfortable about running alternative scenarios. That is something I think I need more practice or something on that. I can see the baseline, but other things running different scenarios. It's a bit.
Yeah, that's fine. And really, the next seminar is going to be all about this. So I think we'll go into quite some detail about the different types of inputs, how to put them together to form scenarios, and then how to check and look and validate the results.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions, any general questions and queries? I mean, I had this one small question from Ashish about the spread for the model. Ashish, it covers 28 states and 4 union territories for India. Andhra Pradesh and Telangana have not been affected because Telangana is a pretty new state, so we didn't have the data set for the past data set for Telangana. We're open for any general questions which is there, or we'll wrap up then. Hello.
Okay, well, I think sounds like we're at the end. If I can take the opportunity to thank everybody for attending, I appreciate it. It's fairly late in the day in India.
But, really appreciate.
Yeah, really good to have you all on board.
Sure, and we really look forward to meeting you in the Meet the Team event that we are planning. And I think almost all of you have registered for the 21st webinar. And just we're looking forward to meeting you then. Okay, if anybody wants to attend the repeat seminars, we have it on 15th. If some of you want to go slightly in detail, we may customize the content a little bit and go slightly more in more detail for the model framework on the 15th webinar. So kindly just let me know, drop me an email regarding the same. That would really help. And thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us in. I'll be sending a